This episode of ReadingTrek is brought to you by our patrons. You too can support this vibrant, fan-based podcast network by visiting patreon.com/the-tricorder-transmissions. For as little as $1 a month, patrons gain exclusive early access to some of our unedited shows, interviews, and even get to join in on exclusive Patreon-only chats. We have lots more Patreon content on the way that you won't want to miss, so visit patreon.com/the-tricorder-transmissions. Be sure to mention that ReadingTrek sent you.
Put down that remote, set your power rings to stun, and pick up that comic.
Sometimes I think you North Americans read nothing but comic books and those ridiculous science fiction novels.
Welcome to ReadingTrek Comics Edition, a Star Trek Book Club podcast and proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network. My name is Marty Ali, and I'm joined by my co-host William Conlon. Will, how are you doing today?
I am great. I'm so excited that we're doing our first comics crossover. And what would a great crossover be without a crossover on the podcast? Are we joined by a crossover from the Tricorder Transmissions Network?
We sure are. We're joined by Shashank from the PoliTreks podcast. Shashank, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. This is very exciting. I eat, sleep, breathe comics, so any opportunity to just talk about comics is incredible. But the fact that I get to do that about one of my favorite franchises, Star Trek, that's just icing on the cake.
Nice.
We're so excited about it, too.
For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a book club podcast working our way through the Star Trek Expanded Universe one novel or comic book at a time, discussing the characters, plot, writing, and piece it into the larger Trek universe as we pull out the meanings and messages of the text. Although we do encourage you to read along with us, the show is designed to give all Trek fans a way to journey through the EU together, even if you haven't read the books. Whether you're reading along with us, revisiting an old favorite, or if you just want to know more about the EU, this is a podcast for all Trek fans. Before we dive into the comics, we want to take a moment and talk about our voicemail contest. ReadingTrek is holding a contest, and you can enter to win a brand new, hardbound copy of the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard by David A. Goodman. To enter, all you have to do is call our voicemail at 609-512-5527 and leave us up to a 2-minute voice message with your thoughts on the show or something we've been reading. That's 609-512-LLAP. With that said, let's get to today's selection.
That's the book. I know it's a book. The book.
Today we will be talking about the Star Trek Green Lantern 2-part crossover, The Spectrum War and Stranger Worlds. First released in 2015, written by Mike Johnson, with art by Angel Hernandez. Will, when and where does this comic take place?
The question isn't where we are. It's when we are.
Star Trek Green Lantern takes place in the Kelvin timeline on Stardate 2262.67, which is after Into Darkness, but somewhere before Beyond. So we're going to turn the page on this comic, but before we do, Black Alert. This is your spoiler warning for Star Trek Green Lantern.
Black Alert. Black Alert.
On the planet Mongo, the last guardian of the universe is running from an evil force who wants the rings that are closely behind him. When the Guardian flees the evil force in a flash of light. Meanwhile, in another universe, Captain Kirk and the crew of the USS Enterprise are en route to Nodell 16 on the far edge of the Alpha Quadrant when they come across a rogue planet that has something the sensors can't pick up. Kirk beams down with a landing party and they discover an alien skeleton surrounded by colored rings. They beam the alien and the rings back up to the Enterprise as Scotty runs tests on the rings, putting them in a tachyon field. A Klingon ship decloaks in front of the Enterprise, and it's General Chang, here to bring Kirk to justice for discretions of the past. As Chang prepares to fire, an explosion in engineering causes cascade power failures throughout the ship. Just then, a green glow surrounds the ship as the rings fly out of engineering and choose new owners, Chekhov, McCoy, Uhura, and Chang, a Gore named Glowcon, and a Romulan named Decius. When a most unusual human shows up in front of the Enterprise, the rings give their new bearers the power to do, well, anything they can imagine. Wasting no time, Chang attacks the Enterprise with the great predator of ancient Quonos, and the mysterious flying human helps fend off the attack with a giant shield. And Chekhov fights it off with blue lasers. The human lands on the bridge of the Enterprise as it heads to warp. His name is Hal Jordan, a Green Lantern from Section 2814, and he wants to know why they have his friend's skeleton on board. Meanwhile, Chang, Glowcon, and Decius are joined by the ring's counterparts, Sinestro, Arcturus, and Larfleeze. Hal Jordan explains to Kirk that these guys are bad news, but not as bad as the evil that brought them here. Back home, the Lanterns were waging a war against Necron and his army of the dead. He has the ability to raise the dead and use them to wipe out all life. They were losing the war when the Guardian activated the last light as a way of saving some life. That's how they got transported to this universe. Across the Alpha Quadrant, Commodore Decker is on board the USS Constellation when it is suddenly and violently attacked by Glokon and Arcturus as a declaration of war. Back on the Enterprise, Hal is joined by 2 more of his Lanterns. One had been gravely injured, and unless she can be saved, the rings will run out of power and they'll be helpless to stop the evil that is spreading across the galaxy. They get a distress call from Starbase 12, and the Enterprise warps away to help. Glokon and Arcturus are wreaking havoc on Starbase 12 when Sinestro, Trang, Larfleeze, and Decius show up along with the Enterprise. The Gorn, Romulans, and Klingons start fighting among themselves just as the rest of the Green Lantern Corps arrive to capture Sinestro. The Enterprise is about to warp away when Spock picks up a strange reading. The planet Vulcan has reappeared. The Enterprise arrives, and a landing party, including the Lanterns, beam down to the surface to discover that Necron has made it to this universe too, and has reanimated the planet and its former inhabitants into an army of the dead. An all-out war breaks out between zombie Vulcans and the crew of the Enterprise. Hal Jordan suggests combining all the rings into one person who can handle the spectrum of emotion that the rings use to power themselves. It's the only way to stop Necron. Kirk gives the ring from McCoy and places it on Spock, while the other rings zip off of Uhura, Chekhov, Chang, Glokon, and Decius, leaving the latter 3 dead in space and onto Spock. With all the emotional energy being channeled into Spock, a huge creature known as the Life Entity appears and undoes Necron's work, including the reformation of Vulcan. With the danger over and Sinestro and the other evil Lanterns missing, the Enterprise returns to Earth for repair. Some of the Lanterns stay on Enterprise and some stay on Earth to learn about the new world they now call home. Once repaired, the ship leaves to boldly go, by Lantern's light, where no man has gone before. The end.
All right, nicely done, Marty.
Yeah, that was beautiful just to listen to. Now all I want to do is go back and read the comic all over again.
So, of course, that was a summary of the Spectrum War, the first volume in the series. We're going to do Stranger Worlds in a little bit, but focus on one volume at a time. Shashank, do you have any first initial thoughts about the Spectrum War?
Yeah, I've been reading comics since I was a kid. I honestly try to read at least 1 to 2 comic books a day. If I'm doing really good, I get through 1 or 2 graphic novels a day. So I've been reading comics for so long now. Every time somebody says crossover, having had experience with crossovers before, it's easy to be tainted because a lot of them just seem to be cash grabs. But my favorite thing about Spectrum War is not only is it a great crossover, just the way it's written, its artwork, and how it brings out the best parts about the Kelvin Timelines characters and the Rebirth/New 52 continuity Green Lantern characters. How it puts them all together and gives us the best possible ideas that we could have about both these characters getting together. That floored me. So not only did I end up realizing this is a great crossover, it has quickly become one of my favorite crossovers that I've read in all my years.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also thought this was a really good crossover. I didn't see how the 2 universes were going to fit together. But then when they did it, I was like, oh, this works really well. Even Scotty replicating the technology into those ring shield things. Will, how about you? What did you think about it?
Yeah, like you said, I really enjoyed it. Now, I've got to preface it and then apologize to comic book fans because I am not an expert by any means on Green Lantern. I'm more of a Marvel guy myself, but I appreciate it. I can say basically all the knowledge I have of Green Lantern comes from a film starring Ryan Reynolds. So, oh boy. But I really enjoyed this. I felt like I learned a lot of the mechanics of the Green Lantern universe, and I thought that they paired well with the Kelvin timeline. I really liked the way that they wrote the characters in here because you could really hear their voices. You could hear Carl Urban's McCoy. You could hear just even the way that the words were written for Chris Pine's Kirk versus Shatner. So the cadence for it was just right. Some of my immediate notes were on there. I love the way Uhura and Spock, just a couple of panels in, where she's saying, just go with it, Spock. The same way that she was doing at the beginning of Into Darkness. And I really liked that they had General Chang in there too as a young character, because that's always been one of my favorite of the movie villains from Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. So to have him as a young man, going against the Kelvin timeline, I thought that was an interesting choice.
The best thing about one of the best things about this crossover to me is that it respects Green Lantern while not compromising anything about Kelvin Star Trek. If there are people out there who haven't heard a whole lot about Green Lantern, essentially the Green Lantern mythology and the character revolves around this group called the Green Lantern Corps, who are space cops. The most simple little way to put them is they're space cops, and each planet or a sector has a particular representative who's supposed to guard that particular planet, and they all answer to a group of guardians, one of whom is Ganthet, and with whose death the comic opens. And each of them are given a ring, and this ring is a manifestation of their emotional energy. And the ring essentially allows you to do anything as long as your goals are clear with that ring and your energy is pure. So it's not unlike Starfleet, the Green Lantern Corps, in that they both want to safeguard the universe. They both want to find better things about the universe. They want to save what's good, and they want to essentially end what's bad. So there are a lot of familiarities there. And just the way the light plays in both these franchises, the way the themes collide, all of it, that first reaction for me was they've gelled this together so beautifully, this space government Starfleet and the space police force, the Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah, and I'm right that Hal Jordan is known for being kind of like a snarky, sarcastic, fun character, right?
Yeah, he's like the cocky flyboy.
Yeah, Hal Jordan is not unlike Kirk. Now that I think about it, they're very similar. And Spock actually alludes to that when Hal at one point just flies out of the ship saying, "I'm just going to do this," and Kirk remarks, "Who does that? Who just goes out without even thinking about their actions?" And then Spock goes, "Oh, I know someone."
Yeah, exactly. I've got that frame up right here. Hal flies off and says, "Try to keep up with me." Kirk says, "Does this guy ever think before he acts?" And Spock says, "A question which I am entirely familiar, Captain."
And Kirk, I believe, responds with, oh, what are you talking about? Oh, yeah, good one, Spock.
That was actually one of my favorite panels of the first volume, too, because it's just beautiful artwork of him flying off the Enterprise, and then the Enterprise going to warp, and Hal is going off in his green line. So I just thought that was a really beautiful frame of artwork. The
artwork of the crossover is incredible. I think as a Green Lantern fan, Green Lantern is my second favorite superhero. As a Green Lantern fan, I buy these books because I mainly enjoy seeing the way the color is played in these books. It's so bright, it's so hopeful, it's all optimistic. The themes are so well resonated through their colors, and the Star Trek comic books are similar. And the way their colors gel and the artwork by Hernandez, how well it complements Mike Johnson's writing, and even the covers to me just felt striking, and I could take any of those covers and turn them into a poster for my house.
Yeah, there's one poster that I especially liked on if you have the 6-issue collection, it's in the back of the comic. It's the poster where they have Hal Jordan in the center raising his fist up, and Kirk and Spock on either side of him with the other characters and their power rings flying behind them, which creates the rainbow, and it looks exactly like the Star Trek motion picture poster.
Yeah, the photorealism is very much like any original Star Trek movie posters. And while that my favorite, though, was just the Enterprise and all the emotional spectrum symbols showing in one of the covers where it's by Francesco Francavilla. And it's just the Enterprise flying, and it's surrounded by each of the rings colors. That's so minimalist, that's so simple to me, and it summarized beautifully what the crossover is about.
Yeah, and I not to knock the second one, but I actually preferred the artwork in the first volume than to the second one. We're going to talk about the second one a little later, but I thought the artwork in the first volume was just really stunning. I loved it.
Yeah, I think that's a difference in who colored the comics too. The first volume was colored by Alejandro Sanchez, and the second volume is colored by Mark Roberts. So there's a little bit of difference between the way the two volumes were colored. But I agree with you that the first volume was much brighter. The colors stood out to me more in this volume, and I loved it.
And I loved the stylistic choices of having, you have the Kelvin Timeline Enterprise and all the characters there. But, like, for instance, when Chang comes in, he comes in on a bird of prey that looks like it's almost from the original universe. Doesn't look like the bird of prey that we saw in Into Darkness. So I like that there's a lot of crossover within crossover, I think, in this.
And if you regularly pick up the Star Trek comics, that's not unusual. The Kelvin Timeline Star Trek comics all have that all the time. They have ships from our Roddenberry universe. They have ships from essentially very Deep Space Nine looking, very Enterprise looking ships in those comics. And I feel like IDW, which is the company that publishes these books, when they are making these books, they just go, let's just do what looks great and let's just do what feels right, as opposed to sticking to the minutia and maybe not giving them the best comic possible, which I appreciate as a comics fan.
Yeah, that's something that we've agreed on throughout the podcast, because there's no way, with the amount of literary content out there, there's no way that you can really make every canon reference continuous. So why not just make it fun and enjoyable?
Exactly. Speaking of fun and enjoyable, there were some moments that made me LOL in this comic. The first one was Uhura, when asked to go to training with Star Sapphire, she says, "Appreciated, but I'm still a Starfleet officer with a job to do, magic ring or not." I just yeah, get it. And then Kilowog, when he's standing on the bridge, and it's just so funny because it was just this serious thing about we need to save the day, let's get out of here. And Kilowog stands there. Which button makes it go faster?
All my hilarious moments came from just Chekhov. The minute he takes over the Hope Ring, he's just flying out of the ship. You can see the glee on his face as the power surges through his body, and he's so excited, he's so hopeful. That reminds me of the first scene we see him in 09 Trek, and the scenes that follow, where he's just, I got it, and he's running through the ship. That just reminded me of those scenes, and I could just imagine Anton Yelkin doing those things if this ever if this was in a movie format.
Yeah, and I loved when the rings choose all of them, that they're all just kind of looking at it what's going on. And I love McCoy's response. Leonard McCoy of Earth, you are chosen. You don't say. That is such a Carl Urban line.
Yeah, that's again when in 09 Trek he's told, hey, you just became my chief medical officer, and he goes, yeah, tell me something I don't know. That's just such a Dr. McCoy line. Speaking of that rings choosing moment, I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about that. In the Green Lantern comics, that is a big deal. When somebody is chosen for a ring, that's not unlike Arthur getting his sword out of the stone for the first time. It's a life-changing, earth-shattering, universe-altering moment, because when somebody's chosen for a ring, that means, one, it cannot be separated from you until you die or you voluntarily give it up, which is what we see when everybody gives their rings to Spock. And when you're chosen, you essentially represent the best of your species, or at least the most emotionally capable in your species. And the fact that they chose the people they chose from our Enterprise, with Chekhov representing hope, McCoy representing compassion, and Uhura representing love. The fact that these characters, they have these qualities so deeply embedded in them in our universe, and it just is enhanced when in the crossover they get those lantern rings. That felt so poetic and first very clever and just beautiful to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with Green Lantern comics, but I'm not super familiar with the other colors other than green and yellow. So it took me a minute to realize which character was associated with which emotion. Will, did you have any trouble figuring that out since you haven't read any Green Lantern comics?
Well, I think it was pretty cut and dry when you saw that, colors went to Romulans and Gorn and Klingons. Okay, those are the bad colors, obviously. Kind of cut and dry on that. I started to pick up on it right away when you saw, like the way, Chekhov is so pure.
Gives that youthful enthusiasm.
Exactly. I think that's what was great, and I love that it was, actually kind of Anton in this, because he was so great. I think it's just, it's really nice.
And the War of Light, which is referenced in the crossover, is also a big Green Lantern event, and it was captured in this series, the mini-series called Blackest Night, which, when published, was one of the biggest events in comics. And that is where all these colors were introduced, and their representations were essentially brought to life. They all come from the evil mind of Jeff Johns, who's a very popular DC Comics writer, and he brought this emotional spectrum and these different Green Lanterns, to our universe. And they just the representations felt beautiful to me, and I felt like it was very satisfying to both Green Lantern fans and Star Trek fans.
Yeah, no, I mean, I without having any real knowledge of Green Lantern, I just thought it gelled really well, and I love that they used, if you have something that involves emotion, then what better character to handle it is Spock. So having him take all the rings, I thought that was very cool.
But Spock's having a hard day, because not only did he have to assume the whole spectrum of emotions, he also had to watch his planet die again, and he came face to face with his mom as a zombie. Like, how is he even still fit for duty right now?
Doctor, I am no longer fit for duty. I hereby relinquish my command based on the fact that I have been emotionally compromised.
I actually think that wasn't an issue for him, because the minute he sees his mother, he goes, "You are not my mother, you are a reanimated corpse." And to me, that felt so Spock, and I realized he immediately rejected all emotions he was having, because he realized, well, wait, Necron just resurrected it. These are not my people. These are something that came up from a dark energy. So for me, in my head, it was just him going, well, this happened, and a completely different version of people are trying to trap me into something, but they're not my people. So I wouldn't have thought it would have been a big issue for him. But that was what I took from it.
And when she says, "I notice you haven't shot me yet," and he shoots her.
That is true. Yeah, he does do that. How did you guys feel it satisfied fans of Star Trek? I would much rather hear about that from you guys, because while I follow Star Trek comics, I also read the Green Lantern comics, and I don't want my opinion to be mixed that much. So if you guys could talk a little bit about how you felt satisfied as Star Trek fans and fans of the Kelvin timeline.
Well, I when I first read it, I thought it seemed almost as though the people writing this were bigger Green Lantern fans than they were Star Trek fans, because it seemed like the Green Lanterns definitely had a advantage over everybody in the Kelvin timeline. But I enjoyed it. I thought that they did a good job of keeping the Trek universe in there, and again, the Green Lantern ideals certainly fit in that universe. So I think it was a good fit. How about you, Marty?
I agree with you on the fact that I do think that it was more tilted towards the Green Lantern side than the Star Trek side. But the ideals that Green Lantern presents and the ideals that Star Trek presents are almost the same ideals. Green Lantern's the little anthem they say when they have to charge their power rings, which we see in the next book, is, that's kind of what Starfleet does, right? So
can I do it? Can I do the anthem?
Go for it.
I'm kidding, but I've memorized it. I've said it in my sleep. In brightest day, blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
I love the line that Hal Jordan gives at the very end of the comic book, Let me pull it up real quick. He's flying around, and he's going to say his anthem. So he says, I'm sworn to protect strange new worlds, new life, new civilizations, to boldly go by lantern's lights where no one has gone before. There
are these moments in the book. To me, comic book are all about those moments that hit you, like that one touched you. The one that touched me was when Hal takes control of the ship and he says, let's do this. And the Enterprise goes from 1701 USS Enterprise to it goes to USS Enterprise Sector 2814, and it becomes full green. That just touched my heart, man.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
So there's a moment I want to address in here because one of my favorite TOS episodes is the Doomsday Machine.
Mm-hmm.
Can Commodore Decker get a break at any time in any universe, please?
No, he's like the who's that guy from South Park?
He's Kenny. He's Kenny. He's Ensign Connor at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost think at this point it's just a joke for these guys. Hey, let's just have him for 2 panels and then destroy his ship.
Yeah, seriously.
That'd be hilarious.
Because I love Decker. I think he's a great character in terms of writing for obsession and dealing with loss and trauma and everything. So I just thought it was interesting that he had 2 panels in there. But that was a great thing. You're going to see me at STLV this year cosplaying Decker because I think he's a great character.
Which Decker? The older Decker or the younger Decker from TMP?
I'm doing the Doomsday Machine Decker. So I'm gonna look like a madman walking around.
Speaking of just those characters, one of the things I deeply respected was until the very end, neither Kirk nor Spock have anything to do with the rings. And I felt like that was such a powerful Star Trek story that they didn't cheap out on the route of, hey, let's show Kirk as Green Lantern. Because that was my first thought is, if I don't see at least one panel with Kirk getting the green ring, I'm going to be so disappointed. But at the end of this crossover, I realized, wait, that makes complete sense because Kirk is at his best when he's full Kirk. That's all they showed in this crossover. And even when Spock gets all the rings, he turns into the White Lantern, which is perfect for Spock. And it's all just for a moment, even the White Lantern, the life entity situation. But the fact that they just let Kirk and Spock be Kirk and Spock, that I deeply appreciated that.
Nice.
Yeah, I did as well. I actually, one of the things that I didn't like about this comic book was these characters get these new lantern powers. And I get this is an issue with just how the comic books have to be paced, but it was just like, they just went with it. Whereas in any other Trek series, it'd be like, okay, you need to get to sickbay and get examined because we don't know what this is,
That's a great point. Yeah, I did not think of that. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, it's just, the comic books have to be fast-paced because of, how many pages they're allowed per issue. So I get that it just needs to keep moving along. But, for it to be, a true Star Trek story, I think it needs to, I always think of Star Trek as very intellectual and, they think everything out through. And it was just kind of they weren't really thinking. They were just go, 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 go. And there was no time for the science of everything, and there was no time to kind of explain what they were doing, which is part of the reason I love Star Trek so much.
Yeah, especially because we read this in a volume format, so you're reading 6 issues into one book. You think about it, you can see where there's all these cliffhangers that where one issue would end, the next one would begin. If this were a Star Trek novel, this would probably be 500 pages long.
Yeah, and it could easily be turned into a Star Trek novel.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it a little trademark also, guys, just of the Kelvin timeline? Even in the 3 movies, there isn't a lot of intellectualization. There's a lot of tag team action. There's a lot of ship gunplay. But I never sat down and, the most intellectual movie of the trilogy, Star Trek Beyond, and even that has very few people sitting and figuring things out moments. And I think because they wanted to give that, this is just a fact, the Green Lantern comics sell more than Star Trek comics. So they just wanted to go, we'll just slap that name on there and we'll give them the best action Green Lantern story possible. And you're right, some things like that might actually affect the Star Trek fans who want to read it for a more intellectually satisfying cerebral experience.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a Star Trek fan and a Green Lantern fan, like, this is probably the holy grail of comics, so...
Dude, I can't even tell you the number of nights I just slept next to this trade paperback, and I woke up at 3 a.m. and goes, oh my God, I need to see that scene where Hal and Kirk meet for the first time. So it's just, it's beautiful. It's a joyful, delightful gift.
And that's what I think is great about the crossovers, because it allows people, the one thing I've encountered with Star Trek fans is there is no one person who's like, I am nothing but a Star Trek fan. Everybody has their shared experiences, so this allows you to combine two completely separate aspects of your lives that you feel equally important about and enjoy them both at the same time. And there's several other crossovers out there that we're going to be exploring in the future. I mean, for people who know me and have listened to some of my history, I've got a very close connection to Planet of the Apes. And we have a Star Trek Planet of the Apes crossover that we're going to be covering on this podcast somewhere down the line with Jeff Hewlett. So I love that you can combine all these great franchises that have no, original connection to each other, but you can figure a way to do it in these comic books. I think it's really great.
It's also a nice breathing exercise for me. As someone who sits down and watches Deep Space Nine for the intellectual ideas, someone who watches the original series for all the philosophical themes, just to get a nice, really fun comic book that I can breeze through is good. And I think it would be false if somebody went in thinking, I want to read the smartest Star Trek or Green Lantern comic. That just won't happen with this crossover. But if you're really just looking for a nice, colorful, enjoyable comic book crossover that respects both the franchise's characters and gives you new ways to think about them, I think this comic does its job.
Yeah, absolutely.
100% agree. So let's talk about the artistry in the Spectrum War a little bit. Shashank, did you have any favorite panels from this book that stood out to you in an artistic way?
My favorite things in comics, and if you read a lot of how to write comic books or how to create comic books self-help guides, they'll tell you that a lot of comic books are about the quiet moments. So that is true for me also. Even though there is a lot of space action, there is a lot of people going to different planets and flying across constellations, my favorite moments in this crossover are the quiet ones. And to me, just the interactions between Jordan, Kirk, and Spock felt very heartwarming. The fact that in the midst of this apocalyptic event, these guys could have moments where Jordan is sitting on Kirk's chair and Kirk just, before anybody says anything, he's like, Jordan, I need the chair. And so he immediately gets up.
It's a very comfortable chair.
Just these quiet moments. That is when the artistry really shows. And the artwork by Hernandez, it felt right to me. It did not feel like they were mimicking every actor from the Kelvin timeline, but it also didn't feel like they were not those guys. If you look closely, right, you can see their faces, but you don't have to be invested deeply in the Kelvin timeline actors and the way they look and their facial and body features to enjoy the story. You could just imagine those as younger versions of the characters we know and still get the complete reading pleasure. So I like that they respected that and they found a little gap between mimicking the characters and making them completely different.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the only thing that's different about, if you were to place it in the Kelvin timeline is, the two hair dryers on a Frisbee Enterprise and the Vulcan is gone. Those are really the only, signs that you're in the Kelvin timeline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, I had a couple things that I picked out. As far as, art itself is concerned, I really like this moment when they are they're fighting at the Starbase. They're doing a space battle, and Larfleeze, who has the orange ring, he grabs one of the ships that's supporting them by the nacelle and the saucer, like he's about to rip it apart, which I thought was really cool because it made the ship look like a toy spaceship. That was one of my favorite panels in the book.
Yeah, when I read that panel, I actually looked over at my Eagle Moss of the Kelvin and was just looking at that like, ooh, I could do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same kind of thing. And then there's a poster in the back, or I guess it's a cover, an alternate cover of Hal Jordan filling the bridge with the green tribbles from his power ring.
Yes.
Which I thought was really, really funny.
What about you, Will? Did you have any favorite panels or moments or scenes?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, I really like the one where Hal flies out of the Enterprise and they both kind of go to warp at the same time. I liked the one where Sinestro shows them all their worst fears, and it's kind of that split screen of each of them. And in the bottom right corner, you have Spock doing that same scream from Into Darkness. You know, the Khan scream.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that one. And then, like you said, I really liked the one where the Enterprise expands in size and becomes NCC 2814. I thought that was really cool.
That's I could just put that, if you just take that one image, I love how that beautifully summarizes everything about the crossover and how they're building you on the bones of the Star Trek franchise to tell a Green Lantern story. And you guys are right. Just as a fan of both these franchises, first and foremost, this crossover is a Green Lantern story, and it felt like the Star Trek characters are there just to be a good complements to everything that is happening. And some of these images, for better or for worse, they summarize those facts. And I like how even when they were trying to not say those things, those popped to me, and I realized, oh wait, even though it's a Green Lantern story, there is that core connection to Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Will, do you have any final thoughts regarding the Spectrum War?
Well, just that I really enjoyed it. As somebody, like I've said numerous times, as somebody who doesn't have a base knowledge of Green Lantern, I didn't feel like I was being left out of it. I didn't feel like I needed to go do hours and hours of research. It was something that I could really enjoy, and I purchased it. I did it on the Kindle, so I have a digital copy, and I'm going to keep it on there, and I'm going to read it more and more times in the future.
Awesome. Shashank, do you have any final thoughts regarding Spectrum War?
Well, my first final thought is, Will, shame on you for not reading Green Lantern. I'm so disappointed as a friend and a fellow podcast host. I think that's your homework for Sunday, sitting and finding out everything you can about Green Lantern.
I'll just put on that Ryan Reynolds movie again.
Why do you have to bring that up and break my heart?
Is that your Star Trek 5?
There are so many things I want to say right now, but I'm just going to stick to the final thoughts of the Spectrum War crossover. But just as a helpful tip, even I know I stated it before, listeners, try and seek out Blackest Night. It's a really good series of comic
I've read
books.
Blackest Night. That's a really good series.
And it gives you a lot more context, because everything that is being referenced about how Kyle Rayner was the first guy that was killed by Necron when he waged his war again, and how you'll understand how Kyle was able to save the world in Blackest Night by becoming the life entity. There are things that will just give you more context, and they'll help you enjoy the story better. So that's just a tip as final thoughts, and how it'll make the ending more satisfying for you. But overall, it's a really good Green Lantern story with Star Trek characters. It's not the most Star Trek story. There isn't a moral that is attached to where you read it and go, oh, wow, we should do that differently in our lives, which is very much the trademark of the Star Trek series that have been going on, specifically with the newer series like Star Trek Boldly Go, where they try to teach you something that needs to be a little life-changing, that needs to be a more hopeful, a more inspirational line of thought. But it's just for the action, the artwork, the beautiful variant covers, the way Hal Jordan and Kirk banter, the way Chekhov flies around the universe like an excited bird, just little moments, big moments, overall story. For all these and more reasons, go seek it out, buy it, read it. It's a really good crossover.
Nice. I will do that.
Yeah, it's the Blackest Night one is also like a crossover with the entire DC universe, correct?
Absolutely. It's a Green Lantern story connected to all the other DC characters, and there are big moments in that too. Like Superman becomes the Black Lantern, so he becomes Nexon's slave in one of the bigger moments. So there's a lot of twists and turns with the other DC characters, not unlike this crossover. But enough from me, Marty. What are your final thoughts on the crossover?
With the Spectrum War, I again thought it was so fun and lighthearted, and it didn't they just had fun with it, and I had fun reading it. And I think that's what comics are all about anyway. Just having fun with these characters, you know. So I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. So I'm not a comic guy per se. I'm familiar with comics, but I think I'm gonna try and read more of these because they were a lot of fun. I enjoyed them a lot.
Yeah, same here.
Did you have something you wanted to say about the last page, Shashank?
Oh, yeah, the last page, which we referenced earlier, it's a very nice conclusion to the crossover in general, but specifically the way it bridges the iconic representations of the Green Lantern franchise and the Star Trek franchise are a convincing reason for all of us to just maybe pick up a few more crossovers between franchises. Just to name a few, there is a forgotten Star Trek X-Men crossover that people might now have to go find in old bookstores because I don't believe it's in print anymore. There is the Star Trek Doctor Who crossover. There is the Star Trek, as Will mentioned, the Star Trek Planet of the Apes crossover. There are a lot of really good crossovers where Star Trek and another franchise get together and they they bridge the themes and ideas that are present in both these franchises. And for the most part, they respect characters from both franchises. And the last page to me felt like, hey, look at how good we bridged both of these together. Now go and find other franchises, crossovers with Star Trek, and see how they treat you. It just felt like a new beginning into seeking out other comic crossovers with Star Trek.
Awesome. So now let's move into Stranger Worlds, the second half of this crossover. Will, would you be kind enough to turn the page on Stranger Worlds?
Absolutely. Here we go. So, 6 months after the Necron incident, the Enterprise is evacuating Deep Space Station K5, which is under bombardment from a meteor storm. Hal Jordan and Star Sapphire are outside fighting off the meteors with their power rings when they start to run out of power. Kirk beams Sapphire back to the ship but can't reach Jordan, who's holding out until the survivors have reached the shuttle. He's beamed back just as the station is destroyed, and Kirk wonders why he took such a risk. Without the power batteries, they can't recharge, and it's only a matter of time until Jordan is no longer the Green Lantern. They realize that St. Walker's ring must be running out of power as well, and they've lost contact with him. Off they warp to his last known location. They arrive at a desolate planet in the Beta Quadrant and beam down to discover a Manhunter, a precursor to the Green Lanterns. Spock scans him to find out he wasn't beamed over with Jordan and the others. He's several years old. Just then, Sinestro, now leader of the Klingon Empire, arrives to inform us that if the Manhunters exist in this universe, then so must the Guardians on their home planet, Oa, and the power batteries. Race you to it? After a firefight, Sinestro and the Klingons capture the robot Manhunter and beam away. Meanwhile, at Starfleet headquarters, the Lanterns Corps are being briefed on an incursion at one of Starfleet's most secure asteroid stations. Atrocitus has returned, and the Corps are being recruited to help. Over on Kronos, Sinestro and Larfleeze are working on uncovering the secrets of the Manhunter. The kidnapped St. Walker passed out on a chair behind them. Larfleeze zaps the head of the Manhunter, his eyes glowing green as his systems come online. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk receives a hail from the USS Bryant, transporting Stewart and the rest of the Corps to the asteroid station. Stewart informs Kirk and Jordan of the situation and they go to warp, but before the Enterprise can arrive, they are ambushed by a group of Manhunters. The Bryant arrives first, and the Corps beam down to discover a bunch of stasis pods, and are greeted by Khan Noonien Singh, holding Atrocitus's red ring in his hand. Khan kills Atrocitus and then becomes the new Red Lantern. He attacks the Corps and buries them in a pile of rubble as he and his army of augments fly up to the Bryant and take out the entire crew. They receive a distress call from the Bryant and they warp away. Upon arriving, Kirk too is greeted by Khan, who is hell-bent on killing Kirk out of revenge. The Lantern Corps, using the last of their power, join the fight along with the Manhunters, and Khan retreats to Kronos, where he learns about Sinestro and the power battery on Oa. Sinestro, having just arrived on Oa, powers his ring in the green power battery and starts slaughtering the peaceful Guardians. After using a secret teleportation gate, the Enterprise arrives just in time to save the power battery from being destroyed. Khan also arrives with a fleet of Klingon ships who start attacking the Enterprise. With Khan and Sinestro both on the attack, the Guardians fear the worst and activate their new green power ring, which flies right into the hand of James T. Kirk. With his new powers, and with the help of other Lanterns, Kirk is able to drain the power from Khan's ring, and Sinestro retreats to his home in an antimatter universe. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk is assisting with the cleanup. He knows the fight isn't over yet. They still have to find Saint Walker and the other color power batteries. Until then, they'll continue their mission of exploration with a planet found by Jordan that has a big red sun. The end. For now.
Bum, bum, bum. And Will, you do know where they're going, right?
Okay, the big red sun. I'm assuming Krypton?
Yes.
All right, I know a little bit about DC Universe.
They're gonna go find Superman. Or Supergirl, because she's actually my favorite.
I don't know if you guys know, Mike Johnson also wrote the Batman/Superman comic book series for a while in DC, and he wrote Supergirl series. So
that's why he's putting it in for him.
Nice. I think that'll be great.
And I would like to think at some point, or at least hope that at some point we get a Star Trek Justice League crossover where it's all the Justice League and all of Star Trek, and it's bonkers.
If they did that, they'd have to include all of the various ships, I think. I think it should be 24th century, and it would be like the crew from Deep Space Nine and Voyager and the Next Generation crew versus like the Justice League, or working with them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that would be cool, because Wonder Woman and Janeway.
Yeah. All I want to see is a race between the Enterprise and Flash.
Ooh. All right, well, bringing it back to Stranger Worlds. Shashank, what were your first reactions to Stranger Worlds?
While I was not disappointed that Kirk didn't get a lantern ring in the first part, my favorite part in this is definitely Kirk getting the lantern ring. And as soon as that happened, I immediately fanboyed hard. Nothing else mattered to me. One of my comic book bucket list dreams had come true, so I might as well just have put the comic down there and said, this is delightful and enjoyable. But even with the world building and all the additions, and I will take a minute at some point during our conversation to talk about some of the mythology that was introduced, even with all that, it just seemed to me like it wasn't as good as Spectrum War.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I thought Spectrum War was a lot more fun, and Stranger Worlds was it was more violent. It was more true to, like, kind of the way that DC Comics tend to go. My first reaction to it was, why is Sinestro suddenly purple? What happened to Sinestro? Like, do you know what, is he supposed to be purple? Is he supposed to be brown? Like, what color is he supposed to be?
No, Sinestro traditionally is purple. Like, that's his color. He's that purple humanoid alien. They should have done a better job of showing that in Spectrum War, so people wouldn't have been blindsided by that. But I think the focus was so much on everybody else. Sinestro is almost a side character to me in Spectrum War, but here, just with the beginning in issue 1, where he's telling the Klingons what to do as their new emperor, that blew my mind. I thought, why are Klingons just letting this guy order them? That was the first thought. But second thought was, this seems perfect. Sinestro is supposed to just go and tell people what to do. That's essentially what he does in the Green Lantern comics also. He's Hal Jordan's mentor before they have a falling out, and Sinestro becomes the yellow lantern with the power of fear. But that's, a big character trait of Sinestro is just telling people what to do. So that felt right to me.
Good. Will, what were your first reactions to Stranger Worlds?
Well, like I said earlier, I liked the artwork in the first volume better. I didn't care as much for like the shading on some of the characters.
The coloring just felt a little off in this one, didn't it?
Yeah, their faces are very flat. There's not a lot of depth to them. I didn't care for it quite as much. The first one felt like there was more effort put into it. But that being said, I thought it was a great story. I loved that, obviously if you're going to continue to tell a crossover story, you have to introduce more characters. So we had General Chang, who was a well-known Trek villain in the first one. I liked very much that we had Khan in this one, so I thought that was a nice move to introduce a new a new grouping of well-known characters from both the Green Lantern universe. I mean, I'm assuming that the Manhunters are well-known, and to have Khan come in as well. So I thought that was great.
I felt like including Khan in this issue made it feel more like Star Trek than the Spectrum War did.
Yeah.
With Manhunters, it's not unlike the Terminator story where people invent machines and then the machines take over. What the Guardians did, according to Green Lantern mythology, is first they invented these machines who just could bend to the Guardians' emotional will. But the Manhunters eventually turned on the Guardians, and they were almost taken over by these machines that they built. So they dismantled them, and they thought they abandoned them, and then they went out to seek real living beings, and that's why you'll see a lot of different aliens, but Manhunters are the precursors to the Green Lanterns. And there are a lot of Green Lantern stories also where the Manhunters keep coming back in one form or another, and this was not new material to me. It didn't feel particularly creative to me, at least, as someone who follows both these franchises, because even in Green Lantern stories, that has been done quite a few times, is where, oh, we thought we got rid of the Manhunters 10 years ago, but now they're back.
So they're kind of like the Daleks and the Cybermen in Doctor Who. They just keep resurfacing and creating new problems.
Absolutely. That's a perfect comparison. Yep.
Exterminate. I just had to do that. When somebody mentioned Dalek, it's like Pavlovian.
So one thing that I'm curious about is I wonder what would have happened if Jordan and the other Lantern Corps had just given up and gone to Starfleet Academy, since their power rings were dying.
If Jordan went to Starfleet Academy, that would essentially be a repeat of Kirk, because Jordan's a playboy. He loves his woman. He loves breaking rules. He just doesn't care. He always just wants to do whatever he wants to do. So for that would just take the blonde guy and replace him with the guy with dark hair. That's just the big replacement to me there.
Yeah, well, there's a panel in this one where Hal is out of Green Lantern uniform, and he's wearing like one of the black Starfleet undershirts, and he's standing next to Kirk. They're about to go into the teleport gate, and they just both say "ready" at this ready, and it looks almost like the two of them are brothers or something.
They look a lot
somehow
alike.
Yeah, somehow they did not tap into that a whole lot, which I think would have been interesting, just to see that interplay between two characters that are very similar. But I guess that was just an artistic choice. What do you guys think? I would have just liked to see them confronting the fact that, oh yeah, we are both very similar, and just acknowledging that. To me, I guess the Spock moment in Spectrum War was a little bit of that, but I would have liked to see a little more.
And there's still potential for them to probably address that in the future. Are they working on Volume 3 right now?
I honestly do not think so. I don't think these comics sold as well as they should have, or at least they were hoping they would have. So that is why there might not have been a quick resurrection. But this is comics, so never say never. We could be 10 years out and they'd go, oh, wait, we are finally continuing that Volume 2 we left off in 2016. And so let's just never say never. But I don't think the comics sold well enough for them to take it to the Superman world that they wanted to take them to.
Interesting. All right, well, people can live it in their imaginations.
Or write fan fiction about it.
There we go.
I really think that the Jordan Kirk thing that we were talking about would, if the comics were allowed to slow down a little bit and have, like, you know, an issue longer where they could explore those kind of ideas, I think it would make it more interesting rather than just like hack and slash action all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually do stuff like that in comics. They're called one-shots, where they just tell a single story about the characters inside an overarching series, and you don't have to follow the entire series. They usually do it when somebody's switching artists or writers. They'll just tell you a story that's a bridge between something bigger that happens overall, and they'll do it by putting characters in a room or putting them in a building or putting them in the same place and them doing something small. Like a perfect Superman one-shot would be an entire story about Superman going and saving a cat from a tree and having a story that transpires in that little street while he saves that cat. So they do that stuff like that all the time, which surprised me even more because I felt, hey, this is a great opportunity to let me see how these guys are similar and why they face some of the same problems they do. Like Sinestro is always behind Jordan's and Khan is always behind Kirk. So they always have these former connected people who are on a revenge quest to get these guys. There is so many similarities there. It felt like a missed opportunity that they did not address it in 2 volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know there's actually some Marvel one-shot films that they made similar to that to bridge all of the early Marvel films, like with Phil Coulson and characters like that. So that's great, yeah.
I'm glad that you brought up OA, because OA is very much like Starfleet San Francisco Earth. It's the center of all Green Lantern stories. It's where the biggest power battery is. It's where all the emotional energy comes from, and that becomes a driving point in the story, which I appreciated, much like Yorktown in Star Trek Beyond. There's that one place that everybody converges at, and I appreciated that quite a bit. And that being OA just touched me because OA is home to the Green Lantern Corps.
One of my standout moments in this comic book was when Sinestro was arriving on Oa, and he says, "Look at them, so innocent in these early days of their civilization, before the corpse has been created, so ignorant of the devastation their creation will unleash."
It's that is another good example of Sinestro's viewpoint, because Sinestro's story to me is like Lucifer's story from the Bible. He used to be the big dog in one place before he was kicked out of that place, and he succumbed to his lower, more evil instincts. So when Sinestro says things like that, it immediately brings to mind Lucifer's story. It also brings to mind stories across the Star Trek franchises, which I don't think we have enough time to name, where there's one character who's supposed to be the best or one of the best, and then he turns evil.
And those are the best kind of Star Trek stories, where it's just, a character thinks they're doing something for a good reason, but it goes against Starfleet's values, and so then they have to try and shut it down,
And Kirk always edges that line to me, which is why he's such an interesting character, is he almost does something that oversteps the rules that are set out for him, even though you could just argue that what he's doing is the right thing most of the time. It's not in accordance with the rules. And that to me is one of his foundational character conflicts, which is represented very well when Khan comes back in this. And I appreciated that fans of the Kelvin timeline enjoyed a return of that story from Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah, because I think Star Trek Into Darkness gets a lot of unjust criticism. I mean, it got voted the worst Star Trek film at STLV a couple of years ago, and I actually think it's one of the strongest ones.
Wait, Star Trek 5 wasn't the winner of that?
They voted... Okay, not only did they vote Star Trek Into Darkness the worst film, they voted Galaxy Quest as being a better Star Trek film than Into Darkness.
Oh, come on. That's
just people who don't like that they retold the Khan story in a different way. They wanted the same Khan story that we had. But, I mean, I'm not going to harp on anyone who doesn't like... you like what you like, you don't like what you don't like. That's fine.
Exactly.
But I do think that Star Trek Into Darkness had a great meaning behind it. You do have to dig a little more into it to get it, but, I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was all about that the admiral who thought he was doing something good for his country, for his federation, but he was going about it the wrong way. And it's the same kind of thing that Sinestro does. He thinks he's doing what's best for himself and for his Lantern Corps, but he's going about it the wrong way.
And to an extent, Khan is also a similar character, right? Well, especially in this crossover, because there is that immediate reaction we have to his revenge quest. But if you understand the motivations of Khan, even in PoliTreks, we are now doing an episode where we talk about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And we agree that not everything is very black and white in that movie, either in Into Darkness or in The Wrath of Khan, where you can at least understand the motivation and go, yeah, you're doing it all wrong, but this is not wrong, the wrong thing to pursue.
The Kelvin timeline Khan, in my opinion, is a more complex character than the Khan in the Prime timeline. He's just got a lot more going on behind the scenes, I think.
Yeah, because the Kelvin Con is given the opportunity to catch up with where the universe is in the time that he's gone, whereas the Ricardo Montalban Con kind of is defrosted and immediately just sets out to kind of take over. So it's like you've got a Con that has a little more grounding in where he is.
But anyway, guys, back to the comic that we're supposed to talk about.
Yeah, well, also just on what I was saying with that, I think one of the things that I thought was a nice little mention in too is because there was a lot of criticism that Benedict Cumberbatch played Khan in Into Darkness. I like that they did a panel in here where he says to all of his augments, "I know I look different, but I am still the same leader you always had."
Comics are a great way to fill in for fans like that. At least to me, where you have the opportunity to answer to something that you couldn't have in a $200 million movie. Where for those of us that are willing to forgive you and join you on a journey, you can use your time to set up moments like this. I could appreciate that particular panel.
It's the same thing in all the novels we're reading too. On our first episode, we talked about how David Mack's Discovery novel filled in some of the visual discrepancies within the universe by saying, the red, yellow, and gold uniforms are reserved only for Constitution-class ships. And, what was the other one that I mentioned in episode?
Why Constitution-class ships don't have ready rooms.
Yeah, that's the one. So it's interesting that the novels and comics are able to do that where they can't fit it into the shows or movies.
Did you guys get a chance to appreciate some of the covers in this series as much as you enjoyed the covers in the Spectrum War? For me, one of my favorites is our Kirk and Spock from TOS in Green Lantern colors.
Yeah, I saw that. That was good.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I like that one. There's also one kind of just looks like it's split in half, and it's got Kirk on one side and Jordan on the other, and it's like just this like soft pastel kind of, yeah,
but
really cool.
You are right in the sense that the artwork really just, I don't know what they were trying to do, but they did not accomplish what they did in Spectrum War, which is a little weird because Spectrum Wars actually has more complex artwork for me to do. There isn't a whole lot of space play in Stranger Worlds as much as there is in Spectrum War. So that should have been harder, but they nailed the one that was harder. And somehow on the easier one, they seem to have jumped the gun.
Yeah, I just can't quite put a pin in what went wrong, but it's just, if the colors weren't as bright, everything felt a little more muted, except for the reds. I think the scenes that were red were very red, which makes me feel like this is more of a violent collection than Spectrum War, just because, red's often a very bad color, but... Mm-hmm.
And especially in like the shading of the faces, I didn't care for the way that they did faces on this. Like on the in the first volume, Kirk and Spock, and they all have really great lines, and you can see that it's almost like cinematography, the lighting of the way that they're standing there. And in this one, everybody's just kind of like even toned. It's like there's spotlights on everyone's faces.
And as someone who follows the Star Trek comics, it just seemed a little more in line to me with those comics. There's a reason why I don't buy them in single issues. I just wait for them to come out in trade paperback so I can buy them all together. Whereas with the Spectrum War, I had to buy them single issues because the artwork is so much more striking and so much more visually appealing. And I'm disappointed to say that if somebody is buying the Kelvin Timeline Star Trek comics, this is more what they would expect is decent to less than decent artwork, as opposed to the spectacular, you're right, the cinematographic artwork style that was in Spectrum War. So did you guys have favorite panels in this particular crossover?
I certainly did. I had one that I loved, and I usually go for the comedy. I mean, there's always heartfelt moments, but I loved there's a Scotty moment because I love Simon Pegg's Scotty, and it's when they're about to go into the teleport gate, and the Manhunter says, "I can provide no assurance that your vessel will survive the journey through our teleport gate," and Scotty says, I'm not even going to try and do the voice, but he says, "No assurance? You really have no idea what it is we do on this ship, do you? I'd be disappointed if there was assurance." And Keitzer goes, "Humph."
Yeah, that's a really good That's a really good panel.
That's such
Marty,
a
what about
Scotty.
you?
That's such a Scotty.
Yeah.
line.
I think they missed an opportunity on not making the teleportation gate a Stargate, but that's just me being a Stargate fan as well.
How many crossovers do you want?
We'll get to that later. Visually, my favorite panel is the one where Hal Jordan and Sinestro are fighting outside in space by the Klingon ship. So you have the bright green of Hal Jordan, the bright purple of Sinestro, and then the gorgeous dark purple of space behind them. And I just thought there was something really beautiful about the way that was drawn.
That's a good panel, especially because those primary colors that are in the Green Lantern universe collide so well with what is being shown in this crossover. I definitely appreciate that panel. For me, it's the double page where you see Khan as the Red Lantern, and he's standing over a body, and he's essentially threatening them and saying, "I have a mutually beneficial proposal for you." You guys know which one I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just watching Khan as the Red Lantern fit in so well for me, because in the Green Lantern mythology, red is rage, and you have to be angry beyond all reason. Atrocitus gets it after losing essentially everybody in his life and losing all forms of identity and being completely defeated, and getting to a point in his head where anger is the only thing he can conceive and fathom, and that is so Khan to me. So when Khan got that Red Lantern ring, that just fit in greatly, and I enjoyed that double page quite a bit.
And there's a great follow-through with Khan, too, from Into Darkness, where, he has that great line where he says, "Now shall we begin?" In this one, he says, "Now shall we continue?"
Oh, dude, man.
Yeah.
That is... Good job, man. Good job. I did not catch that. That's great.
I did have one other favorite thing in here. It's the cover with they're taking a group selfie, and St. Walker's in the front doing the Vulcan salute, but he doesn't have enough fingers.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just really funny. There's something cute and innocent about that, and I love the way they did that.
And
Right.
I think it's a rare Kirk smiling cover in that for me. I don't think I've seen him a whole lot of as Kirk smiling, and especially in these comics. And just to see him smile with Uhura's beautiful smile and Spock just staring with no emotion, that felt really good to me.
All right. Any final thoughts on Stranger Worlds before we move into our thoughts on the series as a whole?
Again, I enjoyed it. Didn't enjoy the artwork quite as much as the first one, but I enjoyed the story, and I liked that they brought Khan into it. And again, I don't think they made it too difficult for a non-Green Lantern aficionado to get into it. I didn't feel like I was being, talked down to or being left behind. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, not to start with the negative, but it just feels right to get out of the way. The most exciting thing to me about this series was the ending, where they set it up with the Red Son. And if a comic book series sets up something, and that is the most exciting thing about the comic, it's probably not the best review I can give a comic book, but that is not to take off any points from the crossover itself, which is delightful. It's enjoyable. I would have appreciated a lot more space action, because that's what both these franchises are about, is space. But instead, they put a lot of characters in rooms, and they let them fight it out in rooms, and that felt a little disappointing to me, because these are comics. You can literally draw anything and make the biggest, best conflict possible, and you're not limited by things like budget. So I wish they would have gone into space a little more. I wished they would have done a little more interesting story than a straight up revenge story, and adding the Manhunter seemed a little less creative. But overall, as a comic book crossover, it's still pretty good and enjoyable, and I recommend it as a reading continuation for the Spectrum War, and those that are wondering how the questions that are raised in that crossover are answered here.
Yeah, I have to agree with both of you that it wasn't quite as enjoyable as Spectrum War, but it still felt like a really good story. I really wish we were getting a part 3 because I really want to see the Enterprise go to Krypton, but can't win them all. So let's talk about our thoughts as a series as a whole. So we're talking about both issues here. For me, overall, again, a very fun and exciting crossover from two franchises that I never thought would have expected to work together. The stories both moved a little fast for my taste. I would have liked to have seen more of those single issue kind of slower stories scattered throughout. But it is what it is, and I understand how comics work. So, but one of the big things for me is I thought that the series as a whole suffered from the too many bad guys trope. Something we saw in Spider-Man 3 where they just had villains all over the place. I thought it distracted a lot from what they were doing because they had to fight one person and then move on to fight this person to move on to fight this person. And it was like, just pick one and stick with it and you'd have a much stronger story, I think.
Yeah, it has the age-old Avengers 1 and Avengers Age of Ultron fault, where Avengers 1 is a great story, and Avengers Age of Ultron uses too many characters, tries to set up too many things, and it does not fail entirely, but it just feels like it's not as great as the first one.
Did anybody pick up any Star Trek style meanings, messages, or morals, as Mission Log says?
I don't know if I did personally, because I didn't think that was the point. If you want to pick up something very Star Trek-y, I don't think you could do that as well in a visual medium that speaks through panels like comics, because when people buy comics, they want to see the biggest, baddest thing possible. At least that's how it's always been in my head. And when you're telling a Star Trek Green Lantern story, I think they would much rather see a space-built action story than this morally uplifting story that you could do with Star Trek. So in a way, that is a little bit of a disservice to me to Star Trek fans, especially with Stranger Worlds, because that seemed like a good opportunity, even with that name, to give us some of those quieter stories and trust that people will read them. But instead, they went the age-old blockbuster movie route and tried to tell the biggest, baddest, most filled story, and that led to its suffering. But Spectrum War is still one of the best crossovers I've read, period, as I stated in the beginning of this podcast. And the fact that there weren't a lot of moral meanings somehow felt okay to me as a reader.
I got one that kind of, I think, fits into the Star Trek world. Towards the end, when Carol and Scotty kiss and it powers her ring and she says, "Love powers my ring," and the starship is full of it. I think that kind of fits to that idea of, man as a more evolved being, and that's part of the Star Trek universe. I mean, it's a little moment, but I think that's one of the things that I gleaned off of it.
But it's enough. It's enough of a moment to make it to give it some of that weight that Star Trek always has.
Exactly.
I didn't pick up on that message, so I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I don't know if this one qualifies, just in the vein of the moment that you were referencing, Will. I don't know if this one qualifies as something that good, but giving Spock all the emotional rings, because Kirk realized that Spock understands all emotions better than any of us ever could, in spite of rejecting emotion and not exhibiting it as much as everybody else. That felt like another layer to not just the Kirk and Spock story, but the character Spock that we've come to know. So I guess in a way I did pick up something about the Star Trek world. It just wasn't an outright moral idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go through and give our overall ratings of the series as a whole. And then I thought we could talk about if there's any crossover Star Trek with something else that's not already out on the market. What would you like to see?
Ah, okay.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Well, Shashank, why don't you start with your rating?
Well, thank you, sir. Overall, as a series, I would give it an 8. Even though I did not enjoy Stranger Worlds as much as Spectrum War, I think Spectrum War and what follows is just worth the buy to me. So for me, an overall rating would be 8, with a little more, with a tag that says buy it for Spectrum War.
Nice. Marty, how about you?
I actually really enjoyed this comic series as a whole. Even though, like, we mentioned a lot of things we didn't like about it, I thought it was one of the most entertaining comics that I've read in a long time. It was fun, exciting, engaging, had just a touch of fan service. I actually gave this 5 out of 5 deltas.
Nice. That's your first time, isn't it?
Yep, that's my first perfect rating. So I think it's mostly because of Spectrum War, and like the fun of that kind of bled into Stranger Worlds. But yeah, it was a really fun read. It's the first time in a while that I've actually been excited to pick up something and keep reading it, and I wanted to finish it like right away. So that's kind of what goes into my ratings, just how badly do I want to read it, how fun, and like how much does it make me smile, and this one made me smile a lot. So
yeah, the page turner effect, I like it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Well, for me, I'm giving it a warp 8, which, to break it down, I give a warp 9 to the first volume and a warp 7 to the second volume, so evens it out. Really enjoyable, and yeah, when I criticize something, I'm not criticizing it just for the sake of criticism. It's all constructive, it's critical, so, I can rip something apart and still love it. So I really enjoyed these, and like I said, I'm going to keep them on my Kindle, and I'm going to enjoy them numerous times in the future.
Awesome.
Nice.
And then is there any crossover, Star Trek or elsewise, that you'd like to see that isn't already on the markets?
Gee, what could we think of? Star Trek meets Star Wars?
That'd be an interesting one. I know everybody wants to know who would win in a fight, a Star Destroyer or the Enterprise, so...
Yeah. That's a good choice. How do you think that would go? Who would lead off the Star Wars?
Okay, well, if you're ever in STLV, and you get a drink in me at the Masquerade Bar, then I've got my theory that I like to put out on exactly how the crew of any of the Enterprises could overcome the Force. Because George wrote such a wonderful little loophole into midi-chlorians being like an actual thing now.
You did not just bring up midi-chlorians.
All we have to do is have Dr. McCoy or Dr. Crusher or the EMH develop an antidote to midi-chlorians, and the Force is rendered completely useless.
Oh.
Wow.
You don't even have a drink.
Cheap shot, man. Cheap shot. That's very interesting. That's a lot to take in. Marty, what about you?
I would actually love to see a Star Trek Stargate crossover. I was actually a Stargate fan before I was a Star Trek fan, so I think it would have to be a time travel kind of storyline with Star Trek characters going back in time and meeting the Stargate characters, and then having to like pair up with them and travel through the Stargates to figure out how to get back.
Nice.
I think that'd be a really fun story, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited to tell you my crossover, because I know this might sound childish, but it just seems like a great comic book crossover or TV crossover or animated crossover to me, is Star Trek crossing over with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Interesting.
Oh, that does sound like fun.
I would love to see the Enterprise make a fumble in the parallel universe situation that is set up and just end up on Eternia, where they meet Prince Adam, who's trying to fight off Skeletor. That just taking that seriously and making something good out of it seems incredibly imaginative. And much like Star Trek, there's a lot of color in He-Man also. So yeah, I think it'll just play off very well.
Nice, that would be cool. Yeah,
that'd be really awesome. I'd love to hear that.
And if I may, I have one other that I think would be really fun, because I love when Trek doesn't go there often, but when they can go the horror route. So like in the TNG episode Genesis, I love the horror aspect of that. I would love to see a crossover of Alien and Star Trek.
Oh, nice.
To have the xenomorph on the Enterprise, and they're trying to figure out how to defeat it, and it's going through the Jeffries tubes. I think that would just be a really cool, really scary Star Trek crossover.
I feel like they did something similar with Species 8472.
Very true, yeah.
All right. Well, unless anybody has any final thoughts, think we can go ahead and wrap it up.
I just had one question for both of you. Who did you like the most in the crossover as a character?
Chekhov.
Nice.
I actually liked Sinestro the best. I don't know why. I've always liked him as a character.
Nice. That's a good
you?
choice. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. For me, it was Hal Jordan.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Seeing Hal Jordan do Hal Jordan things is the best Green Lantern comics to me. And even in a comic with our Kelvin heroes, he stood out to me. And I enjoyed just watching his shenanigans.
Nice. Yeah, I said Chekhov because if I had that, that's exactly what I'd do. I'd be out there flying around going, wee! And then there'd be people inside just give him one more minute.
All right, so before we close up, let's let everyone know how they can get a hold of us. Shashank, where can people get a hold of you online if they want to keep talking about Green Lantern and comic books and Star Trek and politics?
Oh, yeah. I co-host a show on the Tricorder Transmissions Network called PoliTreks with Barry DeFord, who's one of my favorite people in the world and an incredibly smart, insightful guy who gets my jokes. So he has good taste in humor.
Speaking of your jokes, I was listening to your the motion picture episode, and you said something about the Borg that made me I was in public and I just started laughing out loud at it.
That's me, man, trying to crack people up so they don't look at my insecurities.
You're doing something right.
You guys can reach out to our show, follow it, like it, tell us what you think on @PoliTreks, PoliTreks on Twitter and PoliTreks on Facebook. And if you just want to reach out to me personally, you can possibly find me scrolling through Twitter feed at 3 a.m. in the night while reading a comic book. I'm at Shashank Avvaru. Brace yourselves, this is long and weird. SHASHANKAVVARU. That's my Twitter handle. I know it got complicated, and I hope somebody follows through, and congratulations on following it through.
And we'll be sure to post that on our Twitter as well, so you can follow Shashank.
Thanks, man.
Will, where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at William G. Conlin, that's Conlin, and you can find me on Facebook in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group that is moderated by our Tricorder Transmissions leaders, Heather and Jeff. It's a fantastic fan-based community with over 4,000 members who talk about Star Trek and Star Trek Las Vegas and just all sorts of really great things. So I recommend that you join that group and continue the conversation on there. How about you, Marty?
You can also find me on Facebook in that unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is @TimeTravelMarty. And if you'd like to share your thoughts on this week's episode, we would love to hear from you. You can leave us a 2-minute voicemail at 609-512-LLAP, 609-512-5527. Be sure to leave your name when you call, and we'll enter you into the drawing for a brand new hardbound copy of the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard by David A. Goodman. You can also reach out to us by sending us a tweet. We are at ReadingTrek, or by email at readingtrekpodcast@gmail.com. As always, a list of our upcoming selections can be found on our webpage at readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com.
And before we head out, guys, can I just say thank you for having me? It's always a joy to talk comics, and that you'd let this nerd just nerd out on a podcast is really cool. So thank you both.
Oh, well, thank you. And this is not the last time you're going to be with us, Shashank.
So what you're saying is I can move in with one of you guys.
You know, I would not be opposed to that. It'd be cool to have somebody to talk Trek with every night.
And comics.
I think we should buy a condo. A Tricorder Transmissions condo.
In Vegas.
In Vegas.
There we go. Well, if you're looking for more comics coverage, be sure to check out Drawing Trek, where hosts Jeff and Ian are currently working their way through the Gold Key Star Trek comics. Be sure to check out the other amazing shows we have on the Tricorder Transmission networks, including The Original Mission, Disco Trek, Shore Leave, Trek Ranks, PoliTreks, and the brand new Trek Profiles podcast. And with that, Captain Picard wants us to let him read in peace.
I will leave you now to your book.
That is all I ask.